All right. Good morning, everyone. So sorry for a bit of a delay this morning. So my name is Megan McGrath. I am the Education Programs Manager at the Duke Leamer Center, and I work out of Durham, North Carolina. But I'm just here as the Durham part of a live stream with our colleagues in Madagascar and with our Malagasy Scientist Seminar Series. So I will go ahead and just work in the background for most of this and play as host. If anyone has any questions while you're watching, please go ahead and drop those in the chat. We'd love to have them for our speaker this morning. But without further ado, I will pass it over to Beatrice. Oh, it looks like our microphone isn't working, Beatrice. Should have checked that sooner. So we unfortunately cannot hear you. I know your microphone is not muted, but there's no audio coming from you, Beatrice.
I don't know if you all can see me on this, but just in case there's technical difficulties and given the delay, I'll just quickly say thank you very much, Ranaivo, for joining us. Ranaivo is a postdoctoral associate in Duke University, actually, with the Marine School at Beaufort. He's got a PhD from university in the US, forgive me, Ranaivo, I believe it was Cornell. And then he's done some really fantastic papers regarding the benefits for local people for conservation of natural resources. And I won't take any more time, and I'll just say thank you very much, Ranaivo, for your presentation. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, James, and I'm glad to be here. Yeah, my name is Ranaivo Rasolofoson, and I'm a researcher at Duke University. Today I'm going to talk about my research journey from conservation to human health and nutrition. But I'll share a little bit about my background before diving into the scientific part of the talk. So I started, I have quite a multidisciplinary training, I would say. I started with wildlife biology in Madagascar. Basically, that was about the natural part of conservation, the natural dimensions of conservation, because conservation has multiple dimensions, right? There is the social dimensions, and on the other hand, there is the human dimension. So my undergrad training is more about the natural dimension of conservation. But then, when I was chasing lemur in the middle of the rainforest in Ranaivo National Park, I started to realize that, like, wildlife, lemurs, and forests, they're quite fine. If we leave them alone. The troublemakers are us, human beings, not forest or lemurs. So I was thinking, like, if we really need to make impact, then we also have to make something about the human dimensions of conservation. And that's why I started to explore the human dimension of conservation. And I got a fellowship to do my to attend a graduate program in sustainable development and conservation biology at the University of Maryland. And that's how I got interested in economics, particularly how economics explore impacts of interventions designed to foster behavioral change. As the social dimension of conservation has something to do with changing human behavior. So I investigated the impact of community forest management and protected areas on deforestation and human well-being for my PhD. And some of the results of my research indicated that health and nutrition are some of the most important life domains of people where conservation interventions are implemented, including the people with the need that you see in the pictures in the middle of the CAS protected area in Madagascar. And that made me realize that conservation has to intentionally address human health and nutrition if it wants to succeed. So I assessed opportunities to study links between environmental change and human health. And my goal is that with my background in conservation program evaluation and in linking environmental changes and human health, I will be in a better position to design conservation programs that are sensitive to human health and nutrition, so that these programs deliver both ecological and human health outcomes. But today, I'm going to give a brief introduction of what planetary health is and how I believe conservation can better integrate the planetary health framework to make more impact. And I will illustrate with 3 of my studies the impacts of community forest management on deforestation and household living standard across Madagascar, and the effects of forest on dietary diversity. So now let's talk about planetary health and conservation. The world has made significant progress in public health. For example, the rate of child mortality has declined over the latest 2 centuries. In this figure, for example, the vertical axis represents the share of the world population dying and surviving the first 5 years of life, and the horizontal axis represent years from 1800s to 2017. And in the 1800s, over 40% of the world population died before the age of 5. But today, that number is 10 times lower. Less than 4% of the world population die before the age of 5. But at the same time, the world's natural systems or ecosystems have been degraded at an increasing pace and extent. For example, in this figure on the right, it shows the annual loss of global and tropical forest between 2001 and 2017. And the vertical axis represents hectares of lost forest, and the horizontal axis represent years. So in this graph, in 2017 alone, the planet lost about 40 football field of tropical forest, and that's per minute. So that's quite huge. And when these ecosystems are degraded, the benefits we obtain from these ecosystems, called ecosystem services, they are also gone. And a number of ecosystem services are important to human health. For example, examples of ecosystem services important to human health provided by forests include wild foods such as wild berries, mushrooms, and wild meat, and also regulation of some infectious disease. For example, there are studies suggesting that forests regulate the transmission of malaria. Pollination is another important ecosystem service, which is important for food production, and forests also contribute to water and air filtration. And there has been concerns that the loss of ecosystem services caused by ecosystem degradation could counter or even reverse some of the progress made in public health. And these concerns have given birth to the field of planetary health. So planetary health is a field that focuses on the effects of natural system degradation on human health. And planetary health is good news for conservation. Conservation has struggled to make itself relevant for a long time. So planetary health is a way to show that what conservation is doing is relevant. The nature that conservation has long tried to protect matters for human health, but how conservation can better integrate the planetary health framework to make positive impact. So I'm going to discuss 2 things that I believe conservation can do to better integrate the planetary health framework to make more positive impact. First, conservation may need to carefully learn from its failures and successes first. An accurate understanding of its failures and successes will help conservation as it tries to integrate a new framework like the planetary health framework. Conservation is really complex, as I'm sure all of us know, and it has done well in some dimensions and not really well in others. And it looks like getting an accurate understanding of failures and successes is one of the things where conservation has not done really well until recently. This graph shows the timeline of some of the major events or frameworks that influenced conservation over the centuries. Planetary health has a potential to influence the direction that conservation will take in the coming years. And the COVID-19 pandemic confirms that. All of a sudden, many people became interested in conservation because one of the hypotheses of the origin of the COVID-19 virus is that it came from a wildlife trade. And but it was only in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, that a call came out for rigorous impact evaluation of conservation programs. And the call pointed that conservation has done a poor job evaluating the effectiveness or impact of its interventions, and that conservation has lagged behind other fields such as the public health field in terms of evaluating impacts of its intervention. In other words, conservation has not had an accurate understanding of its failures and successes for decades or even centuries. And of course, without accurate understanding of failures and successes, the way forward has been confusing at best. Before that call in mid-2000, conservation relied on trend over time or comparison of condition with and without interventions to assess impacts of its interventions. So the call discussed that these methods do not really reveal impact, but more rigorous analysis is needed. And the good news is that since then, increasing studies have responded for the call for more rigorous impact evaluation of conservation programs, including the studies that I'm going to present today. And because planetary health came into being about 10 years after the call for more rigorous impact evaluation of conservation programs, conservation is now in a better position to learn from its failures and successes while trying to integrate the planetary health framework than it was when it integrated other frameworks such as community forest management, integrated development and conservation project, and payments for ecosystem services. So when I started my research on impacts of community forest management on deforestation and household living standards in Madagascar, only about few published studies have responded to the call for more rigorous evaluation of conservation programs. And back then, all of them were about protected areas. So I decided to do it for community forest management. Community forest management is one of the most widespread conservation approaches. Over 15% of the world's forests are community managed, and these community managed forests sustain the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people. And these forests also provide services of local and global importance, such as watershed protection, carbon storage, and biodiversity. So what I did was I collaborated with many organizations implementing community forest management across Madagascar. Before this study, the country did not have like a national database for community forest management. So I had to gather data scattered across many organizations. And I managed to collect data for over thousands community forest management sites across the country. So how did I do to estimate the impact of community forest management on deforestation and household living standards? One of the common methods that people use when assessing impact of conservation is they compare condition with conservation interventions to conditions without conservation interventions. But comparison of condition with and without conservation interventions, those conditions are often not directly comparable. I'll just give an example. Those conditions can be different. For example, it is known that conservation interventions are often located like farther from major town or farther from market. And if we just compare condition with and without conservation intervention, then we are not sure whether the our estimate of impact is because of conservation, or is it because of other difference, such as distance to major town or distance to market? So in this slide, I present the units by units. I mean household. If we are looking at socioeconomic outcomes, or sites, if we are looking at ecological outcomes. So I present like the units under intervention in this basket of apples on your left side, and the conditions without interventions are represented by this basket of mixture of apples and oranges. So if we do a direct comparison, it doesn't make sense, because what we are making is like we make apples to we compare apples to oranges. It doesn't make sense. So what I was doing is I used that a method called matching, and what matching is doing is basically, as you see in this figure, matching just extracts the apples from the mixture of apples and oranges. So now we have apples representing the units with intervention and apples representing the units without intervention. So we are making apples to apple comparison, which makes sense. In other words, I select units, whether it's household or sites, not exposed to interventions, that are similar to those who are exposed to the interventions. For example, similar in terms of distance to market. So we can eliminate distance to market as the explanation of the pattern that we find in the outcomes. So in this graph are the results of the impact of community forest management on deforestation. And the vertical axis, or the y-axis, is the impact of community forest management on deforestation in percent point. And the horizontal line at y equals 0 represents zero impact of community forest management on deforestation. So anything above the line indicates that community forest management increased deforestation, and anything below the line indicates that community forest management decreased deforestation. And the x, or horizontal axis, show the different comparison I made. But for now, let's focus on the first and the fourth comparisons. And they are encircled in orange or red, I'm not sure, in this graph. In the first comparison, I just compared all community forest management sites across Madagascar to similar or matched control sites without community forest management. And in the fourth comparison, I compared community forest management sites that do not practice commercial use of forest resources to similar or matched control sites. And for the first comparison, where I compared all community forest management sites to control sites, the bar can be barely seen, as you can see in this in the first bar in the figure. It is almost in the zero impact line. That means that community forest management has very little and not statistically a significant impact on deforestation. And community forest management, therefore, does not guarantee forest conservation. But when I specifically looked at the subgroup of community forest management without commercial use of forest resources, that is the fourth comparison, community forest management did reduce deforestation compared to control sites. And the impact is statistically significant. And these sites without commercial use of forest resources received some kind of direct payments for conservations. So the result kind of suggests that payment schemes can have potential to make community forest management work. And in this graph are the results of the impact of community forest management on household living standard as measured by annual per capita expenditure. The horizontal, the vertical axis or y-axis is the impact of community forest management on annual per capita expenditure. And the x or horizontal axis is how I defined exposure to community forest management. A household is exposed to community forest management when 10% of the commune where it is located is covered with community forest management sites. And I increased that threshold of 10% to 25% to see if the results are sensitive to the threshold. And there is a red horizontal line at y=0, and it represents zero impact. And anything above the line indicates, therefore, that community forest management increased per capita expenditure. And anything below the line indicates that community forest management decreased per capita expenditure. And the error bars represent 95% confidence intervals. So in any case, community forest management has not significantly impacted household living standards on average. As you can see that the confidence interval bars included the red line of zero impact. And this graph describes how the impact of community forest management vary with the level of education of heads of households. And again, the y-axis is the impact of community forest management on annual per capita expenditure, and the x-axis is years of education of household heads. And again, the red line at y=0 represents zero impact. As you can see, and again, the blue or purple band that you can see, it represents 95% confidence intervals. And while there is no significant impact of community forest management on average, as we saw earlier, different subgroups of households within community experience different impacts. As you can see in this figure, there is no significant impact for people with low level of education, while people with higher level of education benefits from community forest management. So the results indicate that community elites capture the benefits of community forest management, which is quite a common phenomenon for community-based initiatives. So I introduced this study on impact of community forest management by asking the question like how conservation can integrate the planetary health framework to make more positive impact. And I discussed that one way to make that happen is for conservation to learn from its failures and successes, and rigorous evaluation of impacts of conservation programs, such as the one I presented, can help conservation to have accurate understanding of its failures and successes. So what failures and successes can we learn from what I presented that may help conservation to better integrate the planetary health framework? First, community forest management, as shown earlier, it does not guarantee forest conservation, and it does not guarantee improvement in household living standards. But there is also some evidence suggesting that we can make it work. For example, we saw that payment schemes for conservation have the potential to make it work in reducing deforestation. And we also saw that education can make household benefits from community forest management. So a question that I would like to explore is whether intentional integration of human health and nutrition goals and activities into community forest management will make it work. I don't have the answer for now, but that's a question that I plan to explore in the coming years. But for now, let's see at the second thing that I believe conservation can do to better integrate the planetary health framework to make more positive impact. Conservation can better integrate the planetary health framework by contributing to strengthening the evidence linking ecosystems and human health and nutrition. In a sense, the burden of evidence is on the conservation side, because it is the conservation side that knows that ecosystems provide services that are important to human health and nutrition. But the good news is that increasing number of people in the public health side, including those in the planetary health field, they also know that ecosystems matter, so that we can partner with them to strengthen the evidence. And with strong evidence, we will draw more support to care for the ecosystems like forests that will benefit both conservation and public health. And today, I'm going to briefly present a study that attempts to strengthen the evidence that ecosystem, forest ecosystem particularly, matter for human health and nutrition. I will present my work on the effects of forest on dietary diversity. Deficiencies in micronutrients affect over 2 billion people worldwide. And children in developing countries like Madagascar are particularly vulnerable to micronutrients deficiency. And health consequences of micronutrient deficiencies include limited economic capacity and productivity and increased childhood morbidity and mortality. And there are a load of evidence suggesting that dietary diversity are associated with lower incidence of micronutrient deficiencies. Forest can affect dietary diversity through multiple pathways. For example, forests produce forest food. Forests also provide habitat for pollinators, as I said earlier, which are important for food production. Forests also provide timber and non-timber forest product that people can sell for cash income, which they can use to purchase food and medicine. And some studies also suggest that forests affect women's time allocation. I'll just give an example here of a study from India that when there was abundant forest nearby a village, then women just spent an hour on average collecting forest product like firewood. So they just spent 1 hour a day on that particular activity. But after 10 years, deforestation happened, and then they have to walk further to get those firewood. So after 10 years, they spend like 3 to 4 hours every day to collect the same amount of firewood that they need for their household. And when they spend time just collecting 4 hours or 3 hours to collect those firewood, then they have less time taking care of their family and of their children in terms of food preparation, healthcare, and other activities important for the household health and nutrition. And there are also studies that shows that agricultural technique in the vicinity of forests promotes diverse crops. I did this study for 27 developing countries, including Madagascar. So this study is not specific to Madagascar, but it does include Madagascar. And the data set includes over 43,000 households. So to estimate the effect of forest on dietary diversity, I used an approach called partial identification. I'll just give a short explanation of what partial identification is. When we estimate the effect of a variable, let's say X on a variable, let's say Y, there is always a trade-off. We don't really think about it most of the time, but there is always a trade-off between the precision of the estimate and the strength of assumption that we have to make. On one hand, points estimates of effect, like regression coefficients, for example, they are precise, but often they come with strong assumptions that can undermine the credibility of the estimate. But on the other hand, the partial identification approach does not yield precise point estimate of effect, but it defines an interval instead, delimited by a lower bound and a higher bound within which the estimate of effect is likely to occur. But the good thing about the partial identification is that it makes weak and thus plausible assumptions, which make the interval that partial identification yields more credible compared to the precise point estimates of effect. And I also examined the heterogeneity effects of forest on dietary diversity, and that is, I looked at how the effects of forest on dietary diversity vary as a function of community development level. And this figure shows the effect of forest on dietary diversity. On the vertical axis are the different estimation strategies that I used. The most important for now is partial ID 27, as you can see on this vertical axis, which is the partial identification approach that I described earlier for all the 27 countries included in the analysis. And the other estimation strategies on the vertical axis were just needed for the heterogeneity analysis that I will show later. The horizontal axis represents the estimates of the effect of forest on dietary diversity, and there is a red line at x equals 0, which represents 0 impact. And everything on the right side of the red line indicates that forest increased dietary diversity, and everything on the left side of that red line indicates that forest reduced dietary diversity. The lower bound of the interval from the partial identification approach for all 27 countries included in the analysis is 0.62, as shown in this orange oval that you can see. That means that exposure to forests leads to at least 25% greater dietary diversity compared to no exposure. And remember that it is the lower bound of the interval, so it can be any number within the interval, but it is at least 25%. And this figure shows a result of the heterogeneity analysis. It shows the effect of forest on dietary diversity. That effect varies between communities with different levels of development. The vertical axis represents the effect of exposure to forest on dietary diversity compared to no exposure. And the horizontal axis represents the community development level as measured by community gross domestic product, or GDP. The red line represents 0 effect or no effect of forest on dietary diversity. And as you can see in this figure, that community with lower level of development or lower GDP, or to put it simple, poorer communities benefit from exposure to forest, while richer community don't. And that result confirms the commonly shared perspective that poor community depends more on forest resources than richer communities, and thus poorer communities are more likely to be affected by forest degradation or forest loss. So forests do matter to human health and nutrition. Forests matter most for the vulnerable. And I started the section on effects of forest on human health and nutrition by saying that conservation can better integrate the planetary health framework by contributing to strengthening the evidence that forests matter to human health and nutrition. With stronger, let's say, stronger evidence will draw more people to see the importance of forest and will eventually draw more investment in conservation as public health investment, which will benefit both conservation and the public health sectors. However, while conservation investments can be public health investment, conservation does not necessarily translate into public health outcomes. For example, protected areas restrict access to forest products that may be important for human health and nutrition. So, how to make conservation more sensitive to health and nutrition so that conservation can deliver both ecological and health and nutritional outcomes? Again, I don't have answer to that question yet, but that's the research topic that I plan to explore for the coming years. But I have started this presentation with a framework, the Planetary Health Framework. So I'm going to end it with another framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are a collection of 17 interlinked goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. And the SDGs were set up in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by 2030. That's in 8 years. And research on the nexus of ecosystems, conservation, human health, and nutrition shed light into at least 6 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. For example, we have seen earlier how forest ecosystems improve dietary diversity and thus can contribute to achieving SDG number 2, zero hunger. And I have also done research on how forests contribute to reducing childhood diarrhea and how fishery resources and thus aquatic system benefits early childhood development. Thus, forest and aquatic systems or natural systems more generally contribute to SDG number 3, good health and well-being. In another research, as I said earlier, that I undertook, I found that upstream forests increased the effectiveness of water, sanitation, and hygiene interventions that reducing childhood diarrhea, and thus contribute to SDG number 6, clean water and sanitation. And we also know that forest conservation is promoted as a climate change mitigation strategy. So forest conservation contribute to SDG number 13, climate action. And the research I mentioned earlier about fisheries and early childhood development shows the importance of life below water, which is SDG number 14. And of course, conservation interventions like community forest management contribute to SDG 15, life on Earth by conserving forest habitat. So I will end up by just saying that research on the nexus of ecosystem conservation, human health and nutrition is an important way that social ecological system scientists can engage to meaningfully contribute to achieving a more sustainable future. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to respond to any question that you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ranaivo. And we do already have a question from Beatrice and the students over in Madagascar. And it is, can you tell us some of the challenges that communities face in ensuring they are participating or doing good forest management practices?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a topic of a lot of research. There is a participation issue, that is for sure, because many of the community forest management association in Madagascar, they have very low community membership. And that means that there are very few people engaging in those community forest management skills in those many sites. There are quite exceptions now and then, but there are still many community forest management sites that struggle, like including local communities into forest management. And from my perspective, one of the problems is people don't really see the benefit of doing it. Like being a member of the community forest management associations means that you spend time there, you invest your time, and you may invest some financial resources too in there, but they don't really see the benefits of it, so they are not really encouraged to participate in it. So that's why we really need to look wider in conservation, not just focusing on, as I said earlier, the ecological part, the natural part. It's very important to manage the natural systems, to manage wildlife, etc. But we also have to take care of the human needs, the human dimensions, because if we manage to somehow make people understand that managing this forest will benefit them somehow, then we may have more participation. But the way of to do that, it's a lot complicated, and that's why we have many research going on, looking at what can we do to integrate more people into community forest management so that it can really succeed. And as I said earlier, one of the things that I think we have to do is to include like nutrition and health activities within, more accurately, to integrate nutrition and health activities within conservation interventions. How to do that, I don't know yet. It's a subject of research that we have to deal with, but I just think that that's very important, and we have to do it intentionally, as I said, because for now, most of the interventions out there just assume that by improving people's livelihood, by improving people's income, then they will be healthier, they will have more food. That's a quite a strong assumptions. People may have all the money they have, but they're still undernourished because they don't know what to eat, how to cook, etc., like healthy food. So we have to be intentional about it, really setting some nutritional and health goals in addition to the other goals that we integrate into conservation.
Wonderful. And I think this follow-up question from Beatrice and the students, you've spoken to a lot already, but they're asking, what approaches do you think need to be established to support the implementation of the community forest management? So I know you've talked a bit about integrating human health, but maybe we could talk a little more about just maybe at the start of community forest management and how to integrate the community and approach it.
Yeah. I think one of the debate in the literature is like, even like, as you said, from even at the start of the establishment of those community forest management association and sites, there's a lot of debate in the literature that in many of the cases, like local communities are kind of excluded, not really integrated into the framing of community forest management associations. There's reports about that. I think it's a concerted efforts that everyone has to make. And one thing that I promote is to have a system approach when we tackle these conservation issues. Like conservation, it's about conserving nature, but it has many ramifications. So if we really want to succeed, we have to have a system approach. System approach means that we have to, like, there's a community forest management sites there. That's one thing, that there are people around that community forest management site. Those people get sick, those people needs to eat, those people practice agriculture. So we have to take like all the system into minds, and looking at how the different units of the system, whether the forest, the people, the infrastructure, agriculture, etc., how these different units within the system are interlinked. And then when we know how they are interlinked, then we can come up with like more smart solution to avoid unintended impact, like low participation in community forest management, because that's kind of an unintended impact. When we plan it, we think like, a lot of people will be excited and will get into this association. But when it really goes on, most of the time at first, there are many people participating, but as time goes on, membership drop until there was a case where I did my field work. The members of a community forest management association is just a family, the man, the wife, and a couple of his children, and that's all. And that's why what we want to avoid, and to avoid that, we have to have this system approach. All of us, ecologists, social scientists, economists, doctors, nutritionists, like coming to a table and kind of see, how do you see, asking the doctor, how do you see people self-are linked with this ecosystem or things like that, and then coming up with a smart way to deal with the problem. But I think that's a must if we want to succeed, a system approach rather than like compartmentalized approach, like everyone doing its own thing. And that's at the local level, but that's also at the government level. Those different ministries within the governments need to work together, to sit in a table and to coordinate rather than doing things on their own.
Wonderful. And I'm going to sneak in my own question in between the other questions, which is, when speaking with people here in the West, there can be a lot of misconceptions about other places in the world, developing countries, and their approach to conservation. But I also know that in some regions, the participation in conservation programs can also depend on some deep-seated issues with histories of colonialism and mistrust of outside forces. And so have you ever controlled for, whether or not the point person, the person speaking to them about the community forest management, is someone that they know and trust, or is, someone perceived as an outsider, and if that has an impact?
There's a lot of literature about that. And you're correct. Like, people people are very cautious, particularly about outsiders. Like there's a conservation organization just coming into town. I know that most of those conservation organizations kind of do their best to kind of get acclimated with the local conditions. They get local people assisting them, etc., etc. But I just talked to one of the student at Cursa through email. I had a conversation with him, and he said that we do our best. We work with locals, but still there is this suspicions from those local people toward us that we are going to work to take their livelihoods from them. So there is always that suspicion. How can we handle that? I don't really know. But that's there. Everyone needs to be aware of that, even if it seems like, because like a conservation organization, when they come to town, they kind of get that impression that people are really okay with them. But when you really talk to those people, there is still this reservation somewhere that we don't really like this or things like that. And we need really, I think it's the development of relation of trust between the communities and those people that support them in conservation. That is key. How to develop that trust, I don't know, but maybe one way that we can do it, and that's just from my opinion, is really to give credits to people rather than us, the academics, the conservation organization, having our own plan, like this is what we want. Then maybe we need just to give them credits, like what you want, and then like work from that, rather than we already have these goals and that we want to achieve. What you're contributing in that, but because if we do that, we kind of just already have our schemes, our programs, and we kind of put people in to kind of have external validation to look from the outside. Local people are participating in our thing. But I think it should be the other way around, like what people want, and then we try to integrate what we think is evidence-based science into that what people wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear that a lot, as a trend of involving people from the local communities much earlier in the process, way before you have a plan that you're trying to fit them into, because that would ring false to me too if someone came in and told me what they wanted to do with the land that I lived on. So it's understandable.
Yeah. And what I would just want to emphasize, it's very good. I think it's a good thing to be aware of that. I know that many people in the audience, they do conservation, and it may appear from the outside that people are okay with the interventions, but sometimes it's not. When we really talk about them with them in the site, they have their own opinions. So it's just very good to be aware of that.
Yeah, to be aware, people may be too polite to say something.
Right, and particularly Malagasy people. Malagasy people can say yes, but it doesn't mean yes. So we have to be very careful.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a great question about, you spoke a little about how in some cases there was a difference between the kind of elites of a community and how they benefited from practices versus people with lower income. And can you talk a little more about that observation and kind of what the disconnect is between the forest management benefits and the people who don't have as many financial resources?
What I observed is this. Those community forest management, many of them get supported by some organization somewhere. And when those organizations come to town, most of the time it's the elites that welcome them. Because when you want to establish a community forest managed site, you need to know how to read, how to write, how to read maps, etc. Those skills are needed. So when those organizations come to town, it's most of the time those that can handle them, that welcome them. And because of that, those elites get a closer relationship with the supporting organization, then they somehow manage to make their needs known to the organization, and their needs are known so that they get the benefit. Well, the part of the society which doesn't have those skills, you don't know what their needs are, so they're left out, basically. And even within the community, there is this dynamic. The local community, it's very good to talk with them. They are really the one who implement the intervention, by the way. Most of it depends on them. But even within the community, there's dynamics. There are people there that doesn't want some people that wants all the benefits for themselves, doesn't want to share. And that happens where I went in the forest community forest management sector I went to. There are those elites, and they want everything to be for them, not to share. Like, we went there, we are doing research, and they want all the we want because we had a lot of equipment, so we need people to bring them when we went to the forest, and they just want their sons to be the people so that they can get the money that we give. At the end of our field work, we still have a lot of stuff remaining. Like, we have like some bottle of oils, cooking oils. We have many things, and they want to keep it for themselves. So I think like those people that supporting organization, they have to do like a concerted effort, like really to go down and go beyond the elites of the community, and make sure that every sections in the community get their fair share of the benefits.
Absolutely. And I think something that's established really well from your presentation is just how complex even evaluating these programs can be. I can't even imagine how you begin to start evaluating all of these different factors. So this was fascinating and wonderful. Thank you so much, Ranaivo, for your time and teaching us. I'm going to wait just another moment to see if any more questions pop up in the chat for you, but I think we had some great discussions already.
Yeah.
And I know that if anyone is interested in furthering this conversation, you can get in touch with the Lemur Center. You can get in touch if you're with Beatrice. She can help keep you in touch. And I know that we can continue these conversations because obviously, as you said many times, we're not sure how to approach it, but we know what the issues are. So we just need to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So it looks like we've had all of our questions answered. So I just want to say another huge thank you to you, Ranaivo, for your time and your expertise and your work. And we look forward to hearing from you hopefully in the future again.
Yeah. Thank you.